I've been put in somewhat of an odd place in being given the honor to speak before you this evening. I'd gone through several ideas and written as many speeches before I decided to use this last opportunity to speak to my class in a way that might prove to be memorable. For the past several years, I've had the privilege of sharing with all of you several stories that you've told me have changed the way you thought about things. And this compliment has always struck me as difficult to accept, because it wasn't until the first day of high school that anyone my age had told me that anything I say is worth listening to. But all of you listened and kept listening and honored me with the opportunity to have you listen to me one final time. So I'd like to start by telling you a bit about myself that you might not have known before. I can start by saying, with a fair amount of certainty, that I'm one of the most insecure people I know. I have frequent feelings of embarrassment and of insignificance and of expendability. And I've had these feelings for a majority of my life. And I don't tell you this to generate concern or to ask for your pity. I tell you this to let you know that I struggle with the same feelings that trouble all of us occasionally. And high school is a time in our lives when these feelings can become exaggerated and overwhelming, because we're around people who might give the appearance of having solved all the issues of life. There was a joke that started freshman year that on any day I'd be absent from school, I'd be preoccupied with curing cancer. And I'm sorry to report that I haven't, because on a majority of these days I was actually sick. But there were other days that were more personal, days where I needed to gather my thoughts. And the thought that I turned to most frequently was Socrates' statement that the unexamined life is not worth living. I don't remember the first time I heard it, but I know that ever since, I've asked myself how I can go about living an examined life. A life with a proper perspective. A life of meaning and fulfillment, and a life of happiness. And whether or not you realize it, I think that many of you have been asking the same question. So what I'd like to offer you tonight is a glimpse through the three most promising lenses of life I've discovered, and how they bring a more promising world into sharper focus. The first lens is knowledge. And let me be specific in what I mean. I'm talking about the sort of information that makes us pause and consider its implications. These could be descriptions of women and men from the annals of history that have most moved us, or unexpected oddities about nature that make us think differently about our place in the universe. These are the opportunities granted to us by the gift of education this far. And while it may be tempting in the short-sightedness of our youth to dismiss this or that fact as irrelevant, let's make it an effort to strive towards something greater, to welcome learning for the sake of learning, and never, under any circumstances, let a curiosity go unexplored. There is a pleasure in knowing things, and there is also a pleasure in experiencing things. And there is a depth and complexity to the human experience that we cannot always express in conventional ways. Which is why the second lens I look through is art. Because art offers the most intimate portrait of what it means to be human. Goethe once said, a man should hear a little music, read a little poetry, and see a fine picture every day of his life, in order that worldly cares may not obliterate the sense of the beautiful which God has implanted in the soul. And that's what we've been doing for the past 4 years of our lives. Not only have we heard music, many of us have played music. Others have written poetry. Still others have painted pictures. Let's not let ourselves make the mistake of keeping art at a distance, of treating it as something that exists only in a museum or a book. Art is something we should engage with. And when we find art that moves us, and art that makes us look at the world and ourselves differently, This is the art we should treasure, because this is what lets the mind look at the world in new and unfamiliar ways. But there's one last lens I think is even more powerful and moving than the first two. And this is the lens of love. I spent a large part of my childhood living with my grandparents. And the first experience I had that taught me the significance of love came from my grandfather. By the time I was 7 years old, he was dying of cancer. And the night before he passed away unexpectedly, I was talking to him on the phone, planning a Friday night we intended to spend together. At the time, I had no idea that these would be the last moments I would hear his voice. And when the conversation came to an end, I don't recall saying the words, "I love you." And so far, this has been the singular regret of my life. And I haven't let the words go without saying since. We say those three words often without pausing to think about what they mean. What they mean is that we invest a large part of our happiness and ourselves in another person. And these people are few and far between. Aside from my family, I can count the number of people I can say these words to honestly on one hand. And these people are my friends, the people who mean the world to me. I'd like you to think of the sort of people who love you unconditionally and who remind you that they do when you need it the most. The last people we think of before we drift to sleep, and the first people we think of when we awaken in the morning. The people whose company can span from the early hours of the evening to the early hours of the morning. Because these are the people who we won't soon forget. And we shouldn't take for granted the opportunity to remind them that they've come to mean this much to us. So here we are, on the shore of the sea of the rest of our lives. We were also here 4 years ago, but in retrospect it doesn't seem to compare to the uncertainty laying before us now. There are times we'll be listless and discouraged and lonely. But with a bit of knowledge and a bit of art and a bit of love, we can navigate the waters of what will become our lives. And somewhere along the way, we'll find out where we are and where we're going. Thank you.